Okay, so in this bite-sized clip, we're going to be looking at Alexander's belief in his own divinity and also how he used religion to appeal to the various populations under his control. This is a nice little Renaissance image of Zeus seducing Olympias whilst Philip watches on, and we can also, we can see that obviously the divine and pursuing and emulating heroes is all part of the Alexander story there, and the history. In terms of structuring a response to an Alexander religion question, it's obviously going to depend on what question you've got, but obviously we need to look at the source views towards the divinity. We need to look at his use of prophecies and omens in order to motivate his army. We need to look at how he appeals to the Greek city-states and also to the Egyptians and the Persians. Finally, what we're going to have a very quick little talk about is Alexander's emulation of mythical heroes. The vast majority of our information on this, and obviously because it's more his type of history, is Plutarch. As a priest at Delphi, with his parallel lives agenda, this religious aspect is going to be much more interesting to Plutarch than Arrian. Remember, he's already told you in verse 1 that he's not a historian. And that's why Plutarch's obviously going to put a lot more emphasis on this type of material than Arrian is. In particular, the dreams, the divine signs, the prophecies, those visits to religious sites. If we look at just three aspects of the Plutarch, so for instance, Alexander's conception and his birth. With his conception and his birth, there's a lot of emphasis on dreams, particularly Olympias's dreams or Philip's dreams, or the three victories on the day of Alexander's birth. Verse 17, we've got, again, stuff that Plutarch would pay more attention to, the bronze tablet in Lycia, the tide at Pamphylia. But verse 28 is really interesting for us because Plutarch gives us a little snapshot about whether Alexander really believed in his own divinity or not. He almost sort of makes it like Alexander would tailor his attitude towards his divinity depending on which population he was dealing with. So for Persians, for instance, he's much more in tune with this divine aspect, whereas with Greeks, far more restrained. The final sentence of verse 28 is where Plutarch actually says it's really used to assert his authority over others. If you also look in verse 28 as well, you get this lovely little quote where Alexander's almost admitting to his Macedonian followers that obviously he's not really divine, he's just mortal like them. This whole idea of Alexander using his belief in his divinity as a tool is further expanded on by Arrian. And Arrian says that Alexander uses belief in his divinity as a mere device to magnify his consequence in the eyes of his subjects. He also goes another bit further. He says, well, actually, Alexander wasn't the only king to have done this. Kings such as Theseus, for instance, had claimed divine parentage through Poseidon. So if we look at just the sources, we can really sort of see that actually Alexander is really using belief in his divine parentage as a way of controlling populations, as an extra tool in his armory. With regard to his army, there's so much in terms of references in our sources in regard to prophecies, omens, heroes. Here's the picture of Gaugamela with the eagle circling above Alexander's head, heading towards Darius. And again, there's a whole raft of examples that we could use, from the sweating statue of Orpheus to Tyre, and Aristander's prophecy that the city will be taken at the end of the month, to Gars, where the eagle drops a clod of earth on his shoulder. So there's a whole range of examples where Alexander uses religion to motivate and appeal to his army. Let's look at Greeks. For Greeks, we can really slim it down to two specific examples. First, Alexander's visit to Delphi on an inauspicious day where Delphi's not operating. Alexander practically bullies the Delphic oracle into the prophecy of "You are invincible, my son," and says that's the only prophecy he needed. Similarly, when he gets to Delphi, Troy, it's another sort of PR stunt. It's a great photo op. When he gets to Troy, he sacrifices to Athena, he anoints Achilles' grave, and again, it's reaching back to that symbolism of the Greeks working together during the Trojan Wars. You could read into it a bit further and talk about how it's sort of harking back to the Achilles-Patroclus, the Alexander-Hephaestion relationship. In regard to Egypt, Alexander obviously is declared a pharaoh, and Egyptians believe the pharaoh is divine. Plutarch and Arrian, you can kind of split their discussion again into three little bits. First of all is the foundation of Alexandria and the various prophecies there. So for Plutarch, it's the dream of the Odyssey that he has, and then the omen of the birds eating the grain. In Arrian, it's the prophecy of the grain being scattered. The divine help on the way to Siwa, the infallible oracle, where Alexander tries to emulate Heracles and Perseus. And finally, I suppose, the questions that he asks to the oracle of Ammon. Plutarch gives you way more information than this than Arrian, so he actually gives you the specific questions. He also gives you the mistake that the priest makes, which links to Alexander, or leads to him rather, being branded as the son of Zeus, and Alexander just running with that. Let's not forget the Persians themselves. Remember, we've also had earlier in the module the cutting of the Gordian knot. Gordian knot is a little bit different. Arrian gives you a bit more detail than the Plutarch. But again, it's the idea that Alexander is emulating these prophecies, is destined to be the legitimate king of Persia. It's not the only time that Alexander tries to appeal to Persian religion. He uses a whole raft of measures to show that he, again, is a legitimate successor to Darius, whether that be the adoption of Persian dress and the court etiquette of obeisance, the restoration of the Temple of Bel in Babylon, which had previously been destroyed by Xerxes, again tapping into that Persian war narrative, the emulation of Cyrus and Semiramis and crossing the Gedrosian desert, and obviously the respect that he pays to Cyrus's tomb. All of these would appeal to his Persian subjects. Does Alexander really want to become a god, though? Again, you get a tantalizing snapshot in your sources. Plutarch covers Alexander's discussion with the Indian sages when he asks them questions, and in particular when he asks them how a man can become a god, and the answer is by doing something a man cannot, which he could claim to have done if he's linking to his empire. Arrian says that it's one of the reasons why he wants to go into Arabia, that the Arabians only have two gods, and Alexander thinks that he should be the third. He also requests at Ammon that on Hephaestion's death that Hephaestion be depicted as a demigod. Obviously, that would then infer that Alexander viewed himself as a god. And obviously, we've already mentioned the assumption of powers in Egypt. Remember, becoming a pharaoh means that he's divine. The final section would be, how does Alexander attempt to emulate key mythical figures? Heracles is a nice, easy peasy one. He links back to Heracles through his father, the journey to Siwa, the journey, the objectives of going into India. Achilles is always present. Alexander loves the Iliad, is obsessed with the Iliad. You could say models his relationship with Hephaestion on the Achilles Patroclus link. He links his lineage to Achilles through his mum Olympias. In the Courtius, you've even got the scene of Alexander dragging the governor of Gaza behind his chariot like Achilles did to Hector. Perseus emulates him by getting to Siwa, and similarly we already talked about Cyrus emulating him through crossing the Gedrosian desert and the respect to his tomb. Plutarch also depicts the revel at Carmania as Alexander emulating Dionysus's westward march rather, from the east after they get out of the Gedrosian desert. So again, just to sort of summarise, Alexander and religion, what do we really have to look at? Those source views towards divinity, the army and the prophecies used to motivate them, and the way they attempt to appeal to Greeks, Egyptians and Persians, and attempts to emulate those heroes.